my name is Rooney, and I'm in the 12th grade. I go to a specialized high school.
My name is Tyler, and I am an alum of a non-specialized high school.
My name is Jade. I'm in 12th grade, and I go to a specialized high school.
I'm Betty, and I graduated from a specialized high school.
My name is Lucia. I'm in 9th grade, and I go to a non-specialized high school.
So all of you have had different experiences with the SHSAT, so what would you describe your relationship to it as?
I actually had a very different experience where I came from a pretty wealthy, predominantly white and Asian American neighborhood. So basically since the beginning of 6th grade, teachers and just everyone around me was always SHSAT, you have to go to a specialized high school in order to get into a good college and live your full life and have a really good career. And at such a young age, when you're thinking I have to funnel all my energy and all my time into this one test so that I don't mess up and screw up my entire life, that's a lot of academic pressure to be putting on an 11, 12-year-old. And I remember all of my friends at that time were saying it's sty or die. That was kind of a phrase that people used to say. I remember kids going to test prep. Some even started in elementary school as early as 4th grade, and then they went up to 7th grade. And in my middle school, it was really uncommon to not go to test prep because again, all of us are pretty wealthy and we all kind of wanted to funnel our energy and our money towards prepping for this test. I just remember when I did do test prep, I would kind of hide in the corner of my classroom. I didn't really want to speak up just because I felt so much more dumber and stupider than all the other kids because my test scores were so much lower than those of all the other kids that had way more intense prep that I did. And I remember my friend asked me in 6th grade when are you studying for the SHSAT? And I said, I think I'm going to start next year. In 7th grade, she was really? That's kind of weird. I think you should be starting sooner. And that kind of made me feel am I doing something wrong? Am I not smart enough? Am I not putting enough energy into this test?
That's really interesting. When I learned about the SHSAT, it wasn't until 6th grade, and I believe a couple months before the test, there was a group of us who started going to a teacher who would stay after school and help us do test prep on our own. We do practice tests and that kind of stuff, but we didn't have a formal test prep program or resource to go study for the SHSAT. For a lot of it was on us to study and learn all the material ourselves.
So I grew up in a white and Asian American neighborhood. So all the kids were expected to take the SHSAT and go to a specialized high school, and there was free test prep for those kids in the school, and I went to it because I thought it would be a good thing. And then my mom paid for test prep outside of the school as well for me to take the test. And I remember when results came out and if kids didn't go into Bronx Science or Stuyvesant, they would be crying, absolutely crying because their parents had invested so much money for them to go to a specialized high school, and it was expected of all of them to go. And I remember it was just a really big deal for that community, for people in the Asian American community and the white community to go. Meanwhile, all the Black and Latino students in my school never even thought about taking the test or never even saw themselves as going to that school.
So how did the test and the culture around specialized high schools in general make you feel about your identity and the community that you came from?
At the time, I didn't really realize that because everyone in my community was Asian American white, so we all kind of had the same ideology. We're gonna take the test, we're gonna do really well on the test, and we're gonna go off to these really great schools. But thinking back now, it makes me realize how privileged I was to be able to, first of all, know about the test, and then second of all, be able to take prep classes. When I was in those prep classes, even in my school in general, it made me feel very demeaned and kind of smaller than I actually was. I remember so many kids and just everyone at my school, all they would talk about is okay, go to a specialized high school, STY or Bronx Science, blah, blah, blah. It hurt my self-esteem and the way I viewed myself academically. It hurt a lot.
Because they're specialized, they're elite, they have this elite title, it kind of demeans all the other kids that go to Black and Latino high schools, and it already kind of sets like this hierarchy from like even like elementary school, middle school. Like there's already this like educational hierarchy that will eventually like turn into a social like an economic hierarchy like later on in their lives.
I agree 100% with what you said. I think taking the exam or like having been through the whole process of getting into a specialized high school makes me more critical of the exam and like makes me more aware of the different communities I'm part of. I feel like being a Black student at a specialized high school, there's like some sort of duality in it. Like my community at home, like being in East Flatbush, it's a primarily like Caribbean, like immigrant, like community. And then going to tech and seeing that it's like predominantly like white and Asian, I feel like those are two very like disparate things. And like being a Black student, I feel like I have to navigate those two different spaces like every day. And like taking the exam and seeing those disparities that you're talking about and seeing how there's this severe lack of like Black and brown students in those schools, it makes me a lot more critical of the exam, and it makes me, I feel like, see how segregated the education system in this city is. Cause I went to like a really homogenous middle school too. Like it was predominantly Black. We all had the same kind of mindset and the same kind of ideology. And then like to go from like a school of like 30 kids in my class to like a class at Brooklyn Tech of like 1,300 kids, I feel like it really exposed me more to a lot of the different like ideologies and a lot of the problems that exist in the city. Like you can sort of see them at large.
When I went in to take the test for the first time, it was my first time visiting Bronx Science, and I was sat in a room with predominantly white and Asian American students. I'd never been in a setting that was predominantly white at all. My school is also pretty homogenous, 97% Hispanic and Black. I took the test with two other students from my high school who were also Asian American. For me, I felt like I was the only Latino taking the test, and seeing just how different Bronx Science was from what my zone high school was, it was pretty intimidating just sitting in that environment and taking a test in an environment that's so different from what you're used to. It was a little bit scary, and afterwards receiving the result that you didn't get into Bronx Science or Stuyvesant or any of the 6 specialized high schools that I applied to, it hit very hard for me.
Right, so some of you brushed up on how the SHSAT and the specialized high schools impact your self-esteem and how they impacted your mental health. Would you guys feel comfortable elaborating more on that?
I was very driven going into high school, and after taking the SHSAT, it was sort of like almost a demoralizing experience taking it and not knowing. You go into a test that's in this foreign setting that's basically looks like the castle of high schools, and then you find out that you didn't get in. It's kind of like you weren't supposed to be there to begin with. Why did you take this test? I feel like students who go into this test who are Hispanic or who are people of color, they go in, take this test, not very prepared, and then they find out that they don't get in. How are they supposed to feel empowered to let their peers know, hey, I took this test, even though I didn't get in, maybe you should try, when you don't even feel like you belonged in that space to begin with?
I feel like one theme with the exam, it's not overt, like it's not something someone's gonna like tell you outright. But it's very subtle and it's kind of implied, and like as a student, even though it's not said outright to you, like kind of understand. I feel like a really big theme is like Black and brown students being seen as inherently or like intellectually inferior, and like the test is like set against you. The whole system in general, the whole process is sort of built against you, and like as a student of color, you shouldn't expect yourself to get through the exam or to pass it or to go to a specialized high school. Any discourse that I've heard on the SHSAT, it's sort of like people who advocate for the exam, they don't say it, but like there is a little bit of like racism, you could like sense the racism in the rationale or like the reasoning they have for keeping the exam. Yeah. And they always make it seem like, like this space wasn't made for you. And like if you don't pass the test, you know, that means you're just inferior, just aren't as smart, you know, like they think of this test as like this strictly meritocratic thing to get the best of the best, and like it doesn't take into account any other factors or like what the current state of the city is, and like things like poverty and institutional racism and classism that all impact how students do on the exam and whether or not they get into these schools, I feel like are totally ignored for when people talk about supporting the exam and things like that.
Being like an Asian American, like this discussion has come up a lot in home, at my house, and just like with my like outside school friends and like other specialized high schools. They keep bringing up the same point and saying like, oh, like, but I went to test prep. And like, you know, like I did all this preparation, therefore I deserve to be in this school and, you know, to take the exam. They don't ever think about like, what about the kids who don't even want to know about the exam until they can't even afford the test prep that all of you guys are taking. Like, it's nice to know that, you know, like your parents, you know, they work really hard, you know, they can send you off to test prep, but then like, again, like there are so many other kids and so many other disadvantages, like neighborhoods, communities that don't have the opportunities or like the skills or like the resources to be going to these test prep places and to be having the privilege of like taking mock exams like that. It really upsets me because like they're only seeing it from the eyes of like, oh, you know, like I deserve to be here because I worked so hard. But like, what about the other kids that couldn't really showcase how hard they could be working because of the fact that they're socioeconomically like lower than that of like other races and other like communities?
It's very dehumanizing and demoralizing. I feel like, based on what some of you guys have said already, it's a test that is perceived as like this ticket to social mobility. Like, yes, you take this test, and if you pass, you go to like STI and Tech and Bronx Science. You're definitely on track for going to like a prestigious college, and then, you know, that prestigious college gets you into like being wealthy and successful and finding the career that you want. And I feel like as a 12-year-old, and you're sitting and you have no idea what you want to do with your life.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't know really what you're doing because, you know, you're 12, you're 13, 14. And yeah, to sit here and to learn that this test is what is dictating the rest of your life and like puts you on a track for something, I feel like is a lot of pressure to have as a teenager, like a preteen. Yeah. People don't really talk about this, and it's so normalized, you know, and I feel like even when you get to these specialized high schools, especially with like Brooklyn Tech, there are so many teenagers who already know what career path they want to do. Like, there are kids who already know they want to be a doctor or they want to be a lawyer, and they have like ideas of what kind of colleges they're looking for at like 15 years old. And I feel like it puts a lot of stress and the pressure onto the students.
So you guys all mentioned said something about it kind of being like really a lot of pressure, or it being kind of demoralizing when you're facing the SHSAT and facing like the impact that it might have on your future if you succeed, but in the same way, like how your future might turn out if you don't pass it. And can you guys mention, like looking back at it now, how you felt when you're in middle school?
At that moment, like when I walked into the building to take it, everyone around me was kind of saying the same thing, like this is it. Like, this is gonna be determining whether or not you're gonna be off and ready for college. You're gonna be living like a really great life, whatever. I think at that moment, like, I really just wanted to break down and cry, because I think like a couple of days before that, in my SHSAT prep class, we were kind of like comparing our scores and everything like that. And like, I had like a very low score. And like, again, like I was so afraid to kind of speak up and say like, oh, like I don't actually know how to do this problem, how to do that problem, just because I was like, I don't want everyone to think that I'm stupid. So I always kept quiet. And, you know, like when we were comparing scores, like when I realized like how low my actual like grade was compared to everyone else, I was like, oh, there is no way in heck that I'm gonna go to a specialized high school and like have my career and like my life kind of on track. I remember like when I went into taking the exam, like I kind of went to the bathroom for a second, and I was like whipping my tears, like, oh my God, you know, like this is it. You either make it or break it right now. I can't like regret feeling like that, but it's like, it's so silly and stupid of me to be thinking of it now, just because like, you know, high school is kind of like what you make of it almost.
One of my friends appealed this year to get into an SHSAT school because like all of her siblings have gone to Bronx Science, but she didn't get in 8th grade. So she retook the test this year, and like the week before she got the results, she like broke down like crying during class just because she was like so nervous, and like knowing that like she didn't get in the first time and her parents were upset with her, and she just felt like different than the rest of her family, and that if she doesn't get in this time, like she can't retry again. And she ended up not getting in, and it just like, it felt so weird. I go to an early college school, and she's gonna get into a good college, and she's gonna be able to, like, that's not gonna affect.
It's not gonna impede your college career.
But it's just like the name and like the effect of like knowing that this exam is what makes this decision.
I think it's really funny that like even at such a young age, like the names do really matter to you. When we all went through like the college, well, when you are going to go through the college process, you know, like names are such like a big thing in your mind. It's like, oh, like I have to get into this Ivy or like this school to go into this career path. And it's like when you're putting that ideology and that, again, like academic pressure on a kid that young, like it's crippling to their mental health. Like what are they supposed to be thinking? Like, you know, like you're not really thinking about how like they're gonna be when they're like older, you know, like how like that kind of mindset is just gonna continue and pursue and like and push themselves to basically like work themselves to death, or either kind of just like give up on everything, kind of just say like, oh, you know, like I'm never gonna get through this, like I'm never gonna be as good as the other kids, like what's the point in trying anymore?
Why do you care about the SHSAT discussion?
I don't want anybody to feel the way that I felt leaving the SHSAT, going into it. That whole experience, it's the high school version of taking the SAT.
Well, to me, I think the discussion is important because I was born and I grew up in New York City. And, you know, we always pride ourselves like, oh, this is a melting pot. Like, we're so diverse. But when you go into these specialized high schools and, like, 80% of the kids are white and Asian, and there's no representation, like equal representation to what you see outside of those high schools, that I think bothers me a lot. That's why I think this is an important discussion to have.
I care about the SHSAT because I think essentially what it does is it reproduces a lot of the issues that we see in the city, especially segregation. And I think that it really bars a lot of students, especially Black and brown students, from receiving a good quality education. And it sort of justifies a lot of like racist mentalities and a lot of the like classist things that we're sort of forced to think and like, you know, believe in. And I think that, yeah, like being a student who went through the process, I really wouldn't wish it on anyone else, especially Black and brown kids who are in the city, who come from low income or immigrant backgrounds, who have no idea what they're doing, because it is very stressful, it's very demoralizing. And I think that, frankly, like every school should receive the same kind of quality education and should have the same amount of funding, resources, and opportunities.
I didn't even know that you could retake the test or appeal for the SHSAT. Like, I was totally out of the loop, and basically I ended up taking a test that I knew almost nothing about, except that if I take it, it'll improve my life, the life of not only me, but my family. And to put that kind of pressure on a 10 to 11-year-old is just ridiculous and immoral, and it's not helping New York City students be the best that they can be.
One of the reasons why I feel like this discussion is so important is because like I feel like in a lot of POC communities, like it's kind of like mental health is just brushed under the rug and it's not addressed fully like it should be.
I care about the SHSAT discussion because it perpetuates segregation by having like elite schools that are based on like one day and one test that you needed to study for or have the materials for, and it perpetuates attitudes about mental health, like you just need to like go through it and then take the test, and it just shouldn't be that way.
We should eliminate the SHSAT because
it's clearly not a representation of the whole melting pot ideology of New York City. The minute you do step into any specialized high school, all you see are either Asian American kids or white kids, and Black and Latinx students are not represented at all. but at the same time, like they make up a majority of the population in New York. So the fact that like you're seeing segregation within like a supposedly integrated school system, that's disgusting, and we need to bring more awareness to that.
I agree. If you're going to have one test that like decides whether you get into like these elite schools or not, there are going to be systems that are against certain kinds of people. And if you don't account for those systems and those setbacks, then you're not gonna get the representation that people deserve.
New York City needs to think about, who are we really excluding when we impose a test like this? Are we excluding people who just don't have the ability to succeed in these specialized high schools? Or are we excluding people who just didn't have the resources to do test prep? Or we're excluding people who came from a situation where they couldn't even study because the lights weren't on in their house?
High school, at the end of the day, is only like 4 years of somebody's life. And to put this title on it, I think is just silly. I think we should work on just integrating all of our communities and really serving all New York City school kids and making them all to be like these elite members of society.
Taking the exam is like one part of the battle, and then getting into the schools and being at those schools is like the second half of the battle. I feel like once you get to those schools, as a marginalized student, you have to deal with a lot of racism and a lot of like problematic thoughts about you being there. I think it creates really harmful spaces for Black and brown students where we constantly feel as if we don't deserve like a quality education, or we don't deserve access to all the resources and opportunities that the city has to offer. It just normalizes a lot of like really problematic ideas that essentially just reinforce how unequal the entire education system is and how unequal New York City really is.